She has been to all 50 states. And I think that is really, really awesome. So everyone, please welcome Caitlin.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Caitlin Hudon, an R enthusiast and principal data scientist at OnlineMedEd, which is an adult learning company headquartered in Austin, Texas. One of my favorite things about doing data science is being uniquely empowered to solve big business problems using data. Lately, I've been focused on churn, and today we'll use my recent work to talk through strategies for creating impactful analysis projects and how to execute them. Another one of my favorite things about doing data science is exploratory data analysis, which I think is an unsung hero of our field. And so I'm really excited to talk about how and why to turn exploratory data analysis into formal deliverables. Before we get into data, let's talk about churn. So a very general definition is that if a customer stops using your product or service, they are considered churned. Churn is a big area of focus for businesses, and it's not hard to see why. If you can keep customers happier and engaged for longer periods of time, that translates directly from retention into dollars. Data can be directly impactful on the bottom line here. So if you can understand churn, you can work to improve your product and processes to make customers happier and to reduce churn. If you can predict who might churn, you can proactively work to retain them. So for the project that I mentioned earlier, I've been focused on understanding how our customers interact with our platform and how that usage relates to churn. What you see here is my project charter. And so this is a doc that outlines the scope, the goals, and the details of this particular project. OnlineMedEd is an adult learning platform with a subscription-based business model. And like many subscription-based businesses, we start with a trial. Our trial is pretty important because it serves as the main gateway into our subscription business. And so trials are where users are most likely to start on our platform. My goal as a data scientist is to understand what happens during trials, including where customers seem to be finding value or not, and how trial usage relates to churn or retention at the end of the trial period. If there are areas where we can improve the user experience or the platform, I want to uncover them so that we can be more valuable to our users. Here's one more slide from the charter. So one thing you might notice in the deliverable section is that I'm not promising a machine learning model, or at least I'm not promising one quite yet. This project hinges on a number of exploratory analyses guided by hypotheses that I've generated with the help on a team. So this is a project firmly centered on exploratory data analysis. The goal is understanding and communicating what I learn in the process, and the deliverables reflect that. So I'm going to give specific recommendations and a large presentation so that people across the company can build intuition for user behavior within trials and then make improvements based on what we've learned. Predicting trial churn is a next logical step, but is specifically called out as out of scope for this project. So this project is meant to lay the foundation for the model, and the final deliverable will be the data set that we can use to build the model. I mentioned that this project centers on exploratory data analysis, or EDA. And so for anyone who's not familiar, it's worth explaining a bit about EDA. I really like this definition from the book R for Data Science, which is available free online for anyone who hasn't had the chance to read it yet. I highly recommend that book. EDA is basically the scientific method distilled. And so it's highly iterative because at each cycle you provide new insights and it gives you new opportunities to refine your question, pull more data as needed, and learn things to fuel the next cycle of understanding. EDA is an important process for understanding your data generally, but it's absolutely necessary if you plan to build any machine learning models based on your data. Poking and prodding during EDA is where you find the holes and the weird outliers and the quirks and the limitations of your data. And it gives you an opportunity to improve the data before you start to build with it. Like Brendan, I've never once been burned by understanding my data better, but I've absolutely been burned by building a model before I fully understood my data. So I cut my teeth in data by helping other people build predictive models. And some of my earliest models almost 10 years ago were churn models. One of the most valuable things I learned during my time consulting is that the value of a model extends beyond its predictions. So when we would show clients the outcome of a model, like scores personalized at an individual level, the first question inevitably that they ask is, how does the model work? What's in it? People want to understand what's important and what's not for making predictions, and to check the model's understanding against their own. And I can't overstate how important EDA is here. So most of the time when I'm building a model, I'm the first person to explore that particular data set at the level of depth required to build a model. This makes me the de facto expert, the most knowledgeable person in my company about that particular set of data. And the analyst learns a lot during the EDA process. Those insights are generally useful beyond what they may or may not add to a model outcome. These insights are like cocktail party anecdote levels of interesting for the people whose domain they're in. So like marketers love to know what channels stick out. Product managers love hearing about weird user behaviors. And finance can mine a lot of value out of the quirks of high value users. In short, sharing the insights generated during EDA is very important. And that's why I focused on making them into formal deliverables. So how do we figure out what kinds of insights from EDA would be most useful for other people in our org? We talk to people. When I kicked off my project, the first thing I did after getting approval wasn't to jump into pulling data together for analysis, although I had a lot of fun doing that. Instead, I started by conducting 14 interviews with people across my company to leverage their subject matter expertise and build a more holistic understanding of trials. I've listed several reasons for interviewing SMEs, but one I want to focus on is the middle one. I'm going to the store. Do you need anything? This is kind of how I phrased my exploratory data analysis and the types of insights that I could pull from people. I'm going to be working with this data set for a while. If there's anything that I could do, just like one extra slice or one extra field I could bring in that would make a big difference for my coworkers and their understandings and their ability to make really good data-informed decisions, I want to do that. This is an opportunity to do that. And so I made some friends in the process, getting to talk to people about what they knew about trials, and I learned a ton before I was ready to actually start analyzing the data. I'm sharing a lot of actual artifacts from this project, and so these are the actual interview questions that I asked when I conducted those interviews. I started by walking through the project charter, which included the goals of the project and a preliminary list of hypotheses that I planned to explore and then report back on. And when I was designing these questions, I had end goals in mind. So I wanted to understand as much as I could about trials, including bright spots, pain points, areas to focus on, but I was also thinking about the data and how to make the project as impactful as it could be. Asking about changes in strategy and approach is a really good way to suss out inflection points in the data. So for example, if like a particular pricing strategy or marketing strategy didn't work out, it was a dud after a month or so, you might want to flag that data. You might want to have an awareness of that because those patterns could be weird when you start to dig in. And so the most important question on this list to me is actually the second to last one. What specific recommendations as a result of this project would be most valuable for you and your department? So I straight up just asked, like, what is useful? What could I deliver from this project that would be super valuable for you? And then I took that information and I tried to make a plan to incorporate it into my analysis wherever possible. I started with a list of hypotheses to guide my interview conversations and then help frame the project. So after the interviews, I circled back to the list and refined the hypotheses to incorporate all of the new information that I gathered. And what you see here is a list of about half of the hypotheses covered by this project. So these questions are going to guide my exploratory data analysis. If you think back to the EDA process, the first step is to generate questions about your data. And so now I have a list of high value questions that I'll be able to answer through EDA, which I've refined through communication across my organization. At this point, I have a really solid project plan. So I know exactly the types of insights I'm looking for. I know a bit about what data I should be pulling and what I should be looking for there. And I'm ready to get started. I think it's really tempting at this point to go completely off the map once you have your marching orders, especially for a big project with company-wide impact. You want to make sure that you get everything right before sharing your findings. You want to do the best job. You want to nerd out on the data a little bit. But avoiding that instinct and coming up with a plan to share your work is super important here. And so we'll talk about how to get buy-in at the end of this presentation. But once you have it, it's important that you keep it by delivering on what you promise. And I find that accountability is the opposite of this black hole. So frequent check-ins help me to keep big projects like this on track. Especially in my role as principal, there are always other important projects that I could be dedicated to. Doing so much pre-work and scaffolding for big projects like this gives me the legs to stand on when data sirens start calling. And so it's much easier to say no when I have a solid project plan that I can point people to for delivering value across the organization. So instead of the black hole approach, I suggest that we approach sharing insights from analysis in the same way that software developers approach releasing features iteratively, by aiming for continuous delivery. This is an example of what that might look like for a project like this and the kinds of value that you can get out of continuously delivering insights. So in the first stage, the research stage, I've done interviews. So deliverables there, the individual interview transcripts, are really interesting. That's telling me what people across departments know and care about when it comes to trials. And then another deliverable you can make out of those is summarizing those interviews. It's really easy, but getting a crosscut of like 14 different opinions on bright spots and pain points of trials is actually a really valuable business asset. When I get to data wrangling, there's all kinds of stuff you find at this stage. And so for me, I think I pulled together like 120 something variables from 20 different data sets. It was a lot of data that had never been wrangled in that way before. So everything that I was looking at was brand new, and we had a ton of stuff to learn from it. So some of that stuff needed to be productionalized, taking that data and putting together a more formal pipeline so that we could use it for other analyses or use it when we're getting ready to build that model. That's something I could deliver. Data collection gaps, so finding and filling data collection or process gaps is another useful deliverable. EDA insights, so I'm kind of delivering those piecemeal as I'm in the analysis project or process. New metrics to track. So sometimes you'll find something interesting and you might want to start tracking that over time. Like this one quirk of the data tells you a lot about churn. And so it's a metric that we maybe want to put on a dashboard somewhere. And so I could communicate those to our BI team and have them start tracking them. And then specific business recommendations. So I'm trying to make recommendations. And if I can deliver those iteratively, I'm getting feedback on them. I have the chance to make impacts while I'm actually still working on the project. And people can see the value that I'm delivering over and over and over again at different points throughout this process. Another really nice thing about continuous delivery of insights is that it gives you all of these pivot points and check-in points to improve the project. So if you just go start with the project charter and then end with everything, you're delivering it all at once with no insight from anyone along the way, you're missing out on all of these places where you could be getting feedback. And so it's the idea of working in public, but doing that within your company. And so, for example, after the summary of interviews, I found new things that were important to look at. And so I restructured some of the hypotheses so that I could incorporate those findings. When I was looking at data collection and gaps, I found pieces of data that I couldn't use that I planned to, and that's fine. That actually gave me an opportunity to fix them. Communicating that right away means that by the time we're ready to build that model, we'll have that data, and that will be awesome. Whereas if we waited until the end of this project, then we would have to wait even longer for that data to trickle in. EDA insights, as I was working through some of the hypotheses, I would end up going back and changing hypotheses to come because I would find new insights that informed whether those analyses would continue to be valuable. And then specific business recommendations. We're going to walk through an example of one of these hypothesis explorations, and it's around the length of our trial. So we went from a 30-day trial to a 7-day trial as a result of one of my analyses. And that specific business recommendation had big impact during the time period that I was working on this and informs my work going down the pipe. And so continuously delivering insights gives more opportunities for feedback, and results in a better analysis. I highly recommend it. So the way that you can do that is to build deliverable assets as you learn. The interview transcripts and summaries we've talked about. One key piece here for me has been taking EDA insights and packaging them into something that I can share with other people so that that knowledge doesn't just end with me. And then a new data set for machine learning. So that's kind of the end goal here, but really we're developing all of the understanding and the insight around this data before we get to that. So one thing that you can include in an EDA deliverable is visualizations. I love Klaus Wilke's book, The Fundamentals of Data Visualization. Can't recommend it enough. It's free online, and he also has code available that you can use to make your own visualizations. So just the way that Jesse Mostapak will share code on Twitter to get you started with a data viz, and then you make it a lot prettier. I've taken some of the code that Klaus Wilke has shared and tuned it to my data in order to share this stuff with stakeholders and come up with some really pretty, impactful data visualizations that help people understand the relationships that I'm uncovering. And so this is one example of a visualization that we looked at for people who used a specific product that we have. Are they doing more or less on the site? And then we know when we're ready to build a model, like maybe we want to get some variables around that. Also for product, this is super useful because then they know we need to push people to this part of the product. This actually seems to make a difference. So there's lots of ways that those insights can be useful to other people beyond the model. Another thing that we came up with is the idea of this analysis summary card. And so you can see on the left, we have our little logo for the DAG group. So it's very branded, it's very clean and polished, and that's really important to me. So as I'm sharing results with other people, I want them to feel like we've put a lot of effort into them. They're very clean. And these are artifacts that are going to live beyond this analysis, right? I'm saving all of the work that I'm doing so that people will understand what analysis has been done, how they can apply it, and what we've learned from it. And so here's an example of that analysis summary card. This is just mocked up by our design team. See? But this is an actual analysis summary card that I shared. And so I looked into this hypothesis of trial users are active for more than the first week of the trial and built this visualization to see whether they're using different modalities on our site and when. I have outcomes here. I have key insights here. This is just one like bite-sized deliverable that I can create so people can understand the analysis that I did, the outcomes, and get a visual really quickly. And then I take this and I make a long form write-up. So I want people to be able to reference what was my methodology? Who did I look at? Where are these insights applicable? So I clipped some pieces here. I included things like key insights to really call out the things that we are learning as a result of this analysis. I'm also including big business questions and my recommendations very directly. So in this case, like the data supported shortening the length of our trial. I had quantitative evidence for that. As a bonus, I have qualitative evidence because of all of the interviews that I did. This is where this idea came up. And so I'm able to take all of that data, combine it, and make better decisions as the business and also still be prepping for that predictive model. And then the final piece here is distributing your findings. And so once you have them, you want to make sure that you're sharing them with other people. So we have a channel for this project. And whenever I finish part of it, I go ahead and just upload it to the channel and people are able to read the long form, see the quick one-shot summary, and then go from there. And that's been really helpful. Making tailored recommendations for impact has been something that's gotten a lot of value out of this project. So I thought that we should change the length of the trial, and then the impact you can see directly is this 7-day trial project. So we kicked off another project to take the insights and just go with those, build with those. And so being able to quantify the impact, to trace it over time has been really helpful. And all of this, again, is just kind of bonus, more bang for the buck that we're getting as we're on our way to build a model and use this data that we haven't used before. So when it comes to getting buy-in, I'm going to go pretty quickly through this section. I know I have like a minute. Starts with an idea. This didn't come from someone telling me, hey, go solve churn. This actually came because I saw that there were users using our product who were paying us or who were paying us and not using it. And that seemed wild. And so I took that idea, thought more about it, eventually thought it'd be worthwhile. Weighing out the opportunity costs of those ideas is very important. You want to make sure that you're spending your time on the most important things. Getting feedback from other people, seeing again where this could help. This is building momentum for your project. If you can, quantify impact. I talk with finance to see if we made, a 10% change here, how much does that mean in terms of dollars? And that makes it easier to present. And then finally, coming up with a project proposal. These are the pieces of my project proposal. So it has like an overview, pre-work or research that I need to do, the hypotheses I want to explore, deliverables, how long I think it will take, and a pre-mortem, things that I think could go wrong. How would this project fail? All of this makes me super prepared to get buy-in for this project. And then also when I'm ready to get started, all the pre-work is done. I know what kind of analysis I need to be doing. I know how to structure it. I know who cares about what. It just makes things a lot easier to get these kinds of projects off the ground. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. So before we get into our next speaker,